Welcome to the Hyper Growth Zone podcast. This is your go-to resource for personal growth, mastering communication, and influencing and persuasion techniques that will help you unleash the full potential of yourself and others. Here is your host, Alex Morgan.
Welcome to another episode of the Hyper Growth Zone podcast. My name is Alex Morgan, and I'm a master trainer of hypnosis and NLP. In this episode, I welcome Dr. Jonathan Baktari. Dr. Baktari has always believed that helping others was the ultimate achievement in life. Now, as a business leader, sought-after speaker, and podcast host, he's excited to share his expertise in preventative health, tech entrepreneurship, and other topics that can't be found anywhere else. Dr. Baktari is a creator of the best-selling course, High Converting Call Class, which incorporates neuro-linguistic programming. He's an expert on how to make a startup successful, overcoming roadblocks to accelerating growth of a company, and underrated CEO skills that everyone needs to have. All right, Dr. Baktari, thanks so much for coming on the show. I appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me, Alex. Big honor. Thank you.
So one of the things that we were kind of talking about before, however, that I really want to dive into with you is a lot of people who are listening, since this is called the Hyper Growth Zone, people run into some different roadblocks while they're building their life, building their business. So can you explain a few of those that you see that might hinder accelerating the growth of a company?
I would say the number one, and I'll tell you why it's number one, is people are not emotionally, psychologically prepared for what's in front of them. I think people who have worked and had a regular job and then all of a sudden want to maybe start something on their own, I think they need to be prepared for what's there, which is different than having a 9-to-5 job. If you don't really view it, if you just think, well, I'm basically going to do the same thing I was doing at my 9-to-5 job, except do it for myself. It doesn't really translate that way. I hear all the time, well, someone wasn't born to be an entrepreneur. They're born to just work 9-to-5. I don't think that's actually true. I just think some people who work 9-to-5, and I'm using that as a metaphor for just having a regular job, when they strike out on their own, they have to then understand, one, it's going to require initially a different level of commitment, maybe with time, energy, commitment, and also potentially in terms of hours invested initially. So if you're not prepared, if you don't understand what it's going to take, basically when you become the owner, everything stops with you. If you work at a company and you walk by and a fax machine is broken, you're like, oh, I'm sure somebody will take care of that. But if it's your company, guess what? You're going to take care of that because it's you. And I think this whole idea that I don't have to, when I'm working 9-to-5, I don't have to worry about this, I don't have to worry about that. I always say it's a different drive home when you're working 9-to-5 than when you own the company. Like, what do you think a guy who is working 9-to-5, what's he thinking on the drive home? Thinking, I wonder what's for dinner. Do I have time to go to the gym? I wonder what's on Netflix. The guy who just opened his business on the drive home, what's he thinking? He's thinking, I wonder how that marketing thing I deployed is working. I wonder how many clicks we got on Google today. I wonder if that website is up. I wonder. So it's a different experience. And you asked the question, like, what's the obstacle? I don't want to call it an obstacle, but if you're not prepared for that, that will be an obstacle. That'll be a huge barrier.
Yeah, that's definitely a huge difference because I think generally people over time, they develop their thinking in different ways. So people that are, let's say, work at a job or 9-to-5, like you say, they have a certain set of kind of values in that thinking, whereas the entrepreneur, they're going to be thinking much bigger. It's kind of like, well, you know what? I don't have to maybe listen to someone else anymore. I can do things on my own, but that takes, like you said, a totally different level of commitment. So one of the things that you really can provide some good insights as well is people that are starting these companies, how do they figure out where they should reinvest their time, their money, and their energy to really make it grow and get to the next level? What really causes that focus? What should they reinvest? What shouldn't they? What would you recommend for people starting out?
Well, if you're starting out, you realize that obviously you're going to make mistakes, and especially if you're new to the field or you're new in this role. So as much time as you can, finding people in the industry, finding mentors, taking courses relevant to your industry, going to meetings and conferences that your industry is involved in. All of those things will help you because you're going to make mistakes. The question is, how many, and can you avoid some of them because you went to a conference and you met people who are 5 years ahead of you, and you learn from them. Oh yeah, typical mistake year one. I should have done this, and I was focused on that. So it's all about whether you're watching YouTube videos of people in your industry, going to conferences, finding mentors. Sometimes I say, get a job in your industry. I'll give you a great story. Anecdotes that really hit home. Many years ago, about 15 years ago, an acquaintance of mine came up to me and goes, you know what? I had this great idea. I want to open up a limo company. And it goes, I've done the math. It's no lose. You basically, I don't remember what the numbers were, but you rent a limo for $1,000 a month, right? So you can rent 10 limos for $10,000. Each one makes, $2,500 a month. And you pay the drivers this and that. And it's like no lose. And I said to him, well, that sounds like a great idea. I have an idea. Why don't you go get a job in a limo company for 3 months and come back to me and tell me what a great industry it is? And you know what? Well, very few people, he took me up on it. He actually went and got a job in a limo company. So he actually was wearing a hat, driving a limo. He literally got a job. 3 months later, I saw him. I'm like, so what do you think? He goes, the limo company is the worst thing in the world. I'm like, what happened? He goes, well, you don't understand. It's very hard to get a medallion. It's all political. And then, there's kickbacks wherever you drop the people off. If you drop them off at this restaurant, they'll give you a kickback and this one won't. And you got to have navigate this whole thing, whatever it was. I mean, and he's like, it's the worst. And that, that's an extreme example of when you're going into something, you just see all the upside. Now, it doesn't mean you can't navigate some of that. But if you go in there saying, oh, I just rent a car for $1,000, I make $2,500. Wow, it's like I'm printing money. You have to understand the pain points. Now, you can get into, let's say you go in the printing industry or whatever, but you can then say, okay, there are these problems, but what do I bring to the table that addresses some of those problems better than other people? So that doesn't mean that should deter you. But now you say, okay, I get it now. So I'm going to have to, so in this industry, it's really hard to find new clients. Basically, I'm going to have to steal these clients from someone else. And how am I going to do that? Right? Well, why would they come to me? You've been using one print shop for 10 years. Why would they switch to me? Okay, because I'm a nickel less. That's not going to do it. I provide great customer service. Okay, well, that's not a barrier. Someone else can provide great customer service. So these are the things you need to analyze before you jump in and say, okay, I want to be the 10th print shop in the neighborhood. You're going to have to come up with some strategy that will make you a winner.
That's a really good point, because I actually live in Athens, Greece, and right up the street from me, it seems like there's a new coffee shop opening like every other month. And I don't drink coffee, so I don't go to any of them. But I always wonder, like, how are they always getting the new customers? So when you, let's say, first started your different businesses, what were some of your strategies for right away acquiring new customers so you didn't have to have those worries, let's say on the drive home that you mentioned?
Acquiring new customers, which gets into the broad category of marketing. So yeah, I think for every industry that's different. But one of the strategies I used was I found mentors in the industry. I sought them out and try to understand what angle would allow us to differentiate ourselves if we got into the field. In other words, I say this over and over and over, providing great customer support is not a strategy. You need to do it. You have to do it. The lady who brings you that coffee better be nice to you and be pleasant and take your order and whatever. But that alone is not going to make that coffee shop survive. Providing great customer support is a must, but I wouldn't hang my hat on that's going to take us to the top. So you have to come up with something else. And that something else is often, depending on the field, different things. Like in the fields we went to was technology. We slowly became a software development company, a technology company, even though that's not what we were selling. But the differentiator was you could come to us and skip 1,000 steps or 100 steps if you signed up as a client with us, or you could go to our competitors and feel the pain because they don't have the technology we do. So that's one strategy, to say we're going to deploy technology, even get a bunch of third-party software, whatever. Or you can say we're going to deliver a product faster or better and quantitatively better that other people aren't doing. So depending on your industry, you have to navigate that before you pull the trigger. What are we going to do? Or you can say, I'm actually bringing a product to market that there are no competitors. Our competitors are irrelevant. All we have to do is get the word out. And of course, you see this with some startups where they, Uber, when it first started, yes, taxis were competitors, but not really. So you either have to come up with a business or a product that your competitors are irrelevant, or you have to come up with something that you're offering that is a differentiator in a way that puts barriers from other people. Even if you come up with some gimmick like, oh, well, we're open nights and weekends. Well, how long would it take for your competitors to open nights and weekends? That's not a barrier to entry, right? So you're sitting around, well, how's our coffee shop going to be different? Well, we'll just stay open 24 hours a day. Okay, I hear that. Well, the other ones are only open 8-10 hours and you're going to be open 24 hours. Let's say it takes off. What prevents the guy next door from doing that? So a lot of what you got to figure out is differentiators that are so different and so difficult for others to replicate that they just can't, with a flick of a switch, do what you do.
With all that being said, so someone's got everything started. Let's say they have some, clients, some customers, really good product or some technology employed. What other skills does the entrepreneur, the owner, the operator, what are some skills that you've seen that you're like, wow, that's a must-have skill. You really want to have this to, make the business really grow. What are some skills you've seen?
But Alex, even the way you framed that question is the answer to that question. You know what? Because you called it a skill. And that alone puts you in the 1% category. Because 99% of people think leadership is not a skill. It's we call it a soft skill. Like, Alex, people like you. You're nice. People respect you. You're funny. Of course you'd be a great CEO. That's like saying, I'm a nice guy. People like me. I have a great personality. I have tons of, gravitas. So I'm going to go on a 747 and land the plane from 30,000 feet. No amount of being a nice guy, people liking me, is going to allow me to land that 747, right? But you'd be surprised how many people don't view being a CEO as a technical skill that is essentially like playing the violin or landing a 747. They're just like, well, I'll figure it out. Well, I could put you on a plane in a cockpit 1,000 times. You will never figure out how to land a 747. Or I could put you in a room with a violin for a year and just close the door. I don't think you're going to come out being a concert violinist, because no amount of just trying it is going to do it, right? And so the first thing that I think you said is, hey, if you wanted to be a pilot, okay, what is the first thing you're going to have to do? You're going to have to sign up for pilot school. They can't just lock themselves in a room. So I think the first mistake is the answer to your question is in your question, which is it's a skill. How do you go about acquiring any other skill? No one has to wonder, how do I learn how to land a plane, right? If you ask 1,000 people, what are you going to have to do? I'm going to have to sign up at a flight school, to get 1,000 hours of blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to have to read books, take tests. But when you say, hey, how would you like to be CEO of your own company? They're like, yeah, why not? People like me. It was my idea anyway. I'm the one that put the money in. Well, you put the money in buying the ticket on the plane, but it's not going to let you land the plane. So I think a lot of people confuse it was their idea, it was their money, to the fact that that automatically makes them the best suited person to run the company. Now, they can be, but they're going to have to get the skills.
No, I've seen that recently, actually, because I was working with a company and the company was growing, and the CEO, the current one, was more involved, let's say, with the actual development of the products. They more wanted to cover the tech side. And then after a while, it's like, well, I don't necessarily want to manage the whole company and 200 people. So they're bringing in someone who's more, let's say, for the culture and leadership, and, probably has these skills from doing it for many years. So with companies that you've worked with...
I'm going to stop you. It's not just from, again, when you say doing it for many years, it implies you can get these skills from just doing it. You can't land a plane from just doing it. So you actually have to go and acquire the skills. So I know you probably didn't mean it that way, but even saying it like that, like this guy could be CEO because he's done it. No, this guy is the CEO because he started at a junior level. He, somebody mentored him. He got bumped up as he acquired more skills, and then he was finally a CEO of a company now, and then he was hired to be a CEO. So even how you think about getting the skills, you don't get it from doing it. You get it from being taught, often by starting at a lower level, and then your supervisor or the person, you have in-services, they teach you, and then you become a manager of only one person. Have you ever heard of this thing called the Peter Principle?
I think I've read about it. I can't.
Yeah. So the Peter Principle basically says that most people get promoted to their level of incompetence. So in other words, just because you're a good engineer doesn't mean you would be great at being the head of the engineering department. So like some people so let's say there's a vacancy for the head of the engineering department, and they look around and say, who should we put as head of the engineer? Well, let's pick Joe. He's our best engineer. Well, just because Joe's the best engineer doesn't mean he's going to be great at being head of the engineering department. And I think that's what often happens. People get promoted to a level that they shouldn't be because there was no acquiring skills from where they were to where they're going to be. So it's all about acquiring skills, so you don't hit this Peter Principle where you get promoted to your level of incompetence. And we see this all the time, where somebody gets promoted because they're great at what they do, and they get promoted to a place of leadership, and people transfer the quality. Like if he's a good engineer, he'll be great at building culture in the engineering department.
Yeah, exactly. So what I was thinking where I was going to go next was, let's say this does happen, where then, the current CEO, the founder, says, hey, as far as my leadership skills, but they notice they hit that Peter Principle, let's say. When do you usually see companies then go like, hey, we should switch. We should bring someone in that already has these skills based off what you're saying? Is there like a certain revenue, a certain thing that, a light bulb goes off and they say, hey, this is the perfect time to do it?
I think it's more of a function of how much the current leader is focused on acquiring these new skills, because there's nothing to say they can't acquire the skills. It's not like you're innately a bad leader or innately a great leader, which there is something to that. But if you are like this guy who's like on the technical side, right? So for example, on my podcast, I have a whole season this year devoted to Crash CEO School. And each podcast talks about how to build culture, how to hire, how to fire. Okay, real down and dirty technical skills that CEOs need. How to, address marketing on a global scale. So let's say he went and listened to my podcast. I'm not just, it's not a shameless plug for my podcast, or something similar, or a course. In other words, it's not, nature versus nurture. I mean, you can acquire these skills. Anyone could theoretically be a pilot of a 747. I bet if I paid you $100 million tomorrow and said, within a year, get your license to land a 747, you would do it, and you could do it, and you could land a 747. The question is it worth it, right? Well, literally, if I said, okay, I'm going to offer you $100 million if within 12, 24 months, you can land a 747. Would you take me up on it? I think most people would, right? So getting it is doable. It's just, do you want to pay the price, the time, the effort? Is it easier not to do that and just stay with what you know? So the answer I'm going to give you is there's no time you need to step out. The time to step out is when you don't want to do it, when you don't want to acquire the skills, right? If I said to you, listen, I want you to learn how to play the violin, and I gave you a big enough incentive and you practice 8 hours a day for the next 2 years, I bet you wouldn't sound too bad. But are you going to do that? Are you going to spend 8 hours a day playing the violin for the next 2 years? And what's in it for you? And I'm exaggerating to make a point. The point that I'm trying to make is the answer to your question is you don't ever have to step out if you want to keep acquiring the skills, whether, like I said, the shameless plug of watching my podcast or thousands of other resources there are, finding a mentor, literally hiring a consultant, saying, hey, I need the technical skills to navigate conversations. I need the skill of enrolling people into my vision in my company. How do I hire, fire? How do I promote? How do I engage my staff so they become owners and have an owner's mentality? How do I do all that? If you acquire those skills, you may never have to lead.
And of these skills, you mentioned quite a few. What would you say are some of the more underrated skills that like a CEO should have?
Yeah, that's a loaded question. There's so many. I'll give you a couple. I think one of the things I learned really early on is how you deliver something to 10 different people may have to be delivered 10 different ways. So let's say, Alex, I know you're one of my senior staff, and I read your report, and, it was completely the wrong direction. So I could walk in and say, Alex, listen, that report, boy, you missed it. Like, that's not what I was getting at, totally off. Or I could come in and say, Alex, let me ask a question. I saw your report. Very good. But let me ask you a question, Alex. On the topic of how that impacts our marketing, do you think that report addressed that? Oh, you don't? Oh, I see. So what do you recommend we do to that report to make it more address our marketing issues? The same thing, same message, 2 different people delivered 2 different ways. And I could give you 5 other variations of that same conversation. Or let's say you're a handyman, right? You got a screwdriver, you got a hammer, you got a tape measure. Not every job requires a screwdriver. But if that's the only thing on your tool belt, guess what? Every job is going to get a screwdriver, right? If the only way you know how to talk is that, everyone's going to get that So you have to expand your repertoire. You got to have like 15 different tools on your belt when you're dealing with staff, when you're dealing with vendors, everybody. And when do you pull out the honey? When do you pull out, the stick? Sometimes it's the honey, you're in a conversation with one of your vendors. Sometimes it's the honey that's going to do it. Sometimes it's a mixture of honey and, we're really at a crossroads here. And so part of that is a science that someone would argue part of that is also experience and an art of when to pull out. And that is a little learning curve where you try it and you're like, oh, maybe I should have gone with more of the honey. But part of that, I have one podcast where I talk about just enrolling people into your vision, meaning I have a vision and I want to get you enrolled into that. I could just demand, listen, you need to be enrolled in my vision, or just write you in a memo, or depending on the person, it takes a different strategy. So I don't know if that answers your question or helps.
That really helps, because actually one of the things that I teach in my trainings is behavioral flexibility. And one of the easiest ways that you can do that is with communication. And when you were telling, hey, I demand you, that wouldn't get across with me. I don't know if you could see my face as you were doing it that way, even though you were just joking around. So this is a really good point that I think people need to understand, because the person with the most flexibility, they're going to be the one controlling the system or the situation. So if you have 10 people that you have to deliver a message to, and you can do that in 10 different ways and be flexible with everyone, then you're going to be in control of all this and essentially get what you want for your company. So that point was actually perfect, because I talk about that quite a bit on here with communicating.
But just to add to what you're saying, there are some people in my senior staff that I can't just blurt out, that report was just the worst. You know why? Because I've already established a 10-year relationship with them. They're not going to take that the wrong way. So it doesn't mean you can't talk like that. There are certain people that you can eventually evolve to that you can just say, no, you missed it. That was completely wrong. But they know where that's coming from. They know that you want the best for them. You're just cutting to the chase, right? You're just, and so it doesn't preclude you from talking like that. It's just one of the 10 different ways, depending on, there will be people that you can just get right to the chase and say, oh my gosh, what were you doing when you wrote that report? Like, even joke about it. Like, were you like half sleeping or something? Because that was the worst. They'll get a chuckle out of it. You'll laugh. Okay, so what should we do? And so depends on the rapport. There are people that you can even be that frank with, and they'll literally smile as you're telling them that, because they already know you're coming from a place where you care about them, you want the best for them, you respect them, because they've had 1,000 other conversations with you. So what you're saying is put in perspective of the entire body of work that you two have had together.
That was the first word that popped in my mind when you said that, was rapport. And so, of course, along with rapport comes trust. So if your senior staff, they trust you, guess what? You could essentially say whatever to them within reason. Of course, you're not going to go crazy or anything, but they're then going to accept what you're saying uncritically. They're not even going to think about it because they trust you. So this point, the underrated skill, it was actually perfect for this. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. Now, I think we talked about a lot of good things here. You already mentioned your podcast. However, if you want to, give a name of the podcast and any other things that you want to plug so people can find you, I think it would be a good time to, do that now and share a bit about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, our podcast is free, and people just want to get some skills on being a leader. And so it's BaktariMD on YouTube, as well as on all the normal Spotify and other platforms. We actually have a course that talks about how to handle the phone, especially on incoming appointments or sales. It's called highconvertingcallclasses.com. What's interesting about that course, which is right up your alley, it's essentially all neurolinguistics. It's not even a sales course. It's literally how to build subject matter authority. It's a small piece of it, but to get people so you don't have to actually even sell them. So it's a sales course, but not really, because you're not selling and it's a very detailed course with lots of rules and do's and don'ts, but it's inherently built on neurolinguistics as the foundation.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that. And really thanks for talking about, you really opened my mind to, the skills and all this, the way of thinking about it, I think was really helpful for me. So I hope it was helpful to all the listeners as well. So I really appreciate you coming on, Dr. Baktari. So thanks again for coming on.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So thanks for listening. And wherever you listen to this podcast, please rate the podcast so it can get into the minds of more people. And I'd love to hear your feedback. And I hope to see you on the next episode.